Final Fantasy X released over 20 years ago in December of 2001 for the PlayStation 2, and in anticipation of the upcoming release of Final Fantasy XVI, I figured I would go back and revisit one of the most influential games of all time. My 50 plus hours spent here in the world of Spira were filled with some of the highest highs and lowest lows, so I figured I'd share them with you guys in case you're thinking about revisiting this gem too. I am a diehard Final Fantasy fan. The masterful storytelling mixed with engaging, often turn-based combat is not something new to JRPGs, but Square Enix has always been able to deliver beautiful moments that stay in your head for a lifetime with this series. But I'm going to do my absolute best to not let my love for the series impact what I say about this game. Without spoiling too much of this magical story, you play as a boy named Titus. Apparently it's pronounced Titus, but I've been saying Titus for the past 20 years and I'm not about to change that now. Titus is a professional blitzball player in the land of Zanarkand. Blitzball is pretty much just underwater soccer. Remember, this is a Final Fantasy game. Laws and science don't always apply. His awful abusive father named Jet was also a renowned blitzball player. During one of Titus's big blitzball games, a giant creature attacks Zanarkand. Jet's old friend Aaron shows up and claims it's something called Sin. Sin then destroys the city and sends Titus and Aaron to the world of Spira 1,000 years in the future. Once in Spira, Titus meets his new crew consisting of Waka, Lulu, Kamari, Yuna, Riku, and once again Aaron. Yuna is a summoner, meaning she holds the power to defeat Sin. Everyone decides to become Yuna's guardians and to do whatever it takes to help her on her journey. That is obviously an incredibly simplified explanation of the plot, but I'm not exaggerating when I say this is one of the best stories I have ever experienced in a video game. It's a combination of a lot of simple ideas executed perfectly. By the midway point of the game, you'll find yourself actually caring about the lives of each character, and watching them grow and develop over this journey is really something special. Earlier, I called Final Fantasy X one of the most influential games of all time, and even that feels like an understatement. Final Fantasy is a franchise that delivers unimaginably large games. Final Fantasy VI is widely regarded as one of the best RPGs ever, and pushed the Super Nintendo to its limits. Final Fantasy VII has some of the most iconic characters to ever come out of a video game, and was the first game to really feel like a movie with its massive cutscenes, 3D graphics, and amazing soundtrack. The game required 3 discs to fit on the PlayStation 1, and multiple discs became a bit of a trend for the Final Fantasy franchise after that. Final Fantasy X took what I mentioned about those previous games and revved it up. Being the first release for the PlayStation 2, Square was able to do things that were completely unimaginable in gaming before this. Full voice acting with faces that actually expressed emotions was probably the biggest innovation, but it's the full CGI cutscenes that still hold up well today. Gameplay-wise, this was probably the last traditional style Final Fantasy game. When moving around, you don't have control of the camera, and at times it almost feels like you're walking around on a painting. It doesn't sound that great, but having this style made for some of the most visually stunning and gorgeous detailed backgrounds. The combat is fully turn-based, but what gives it an amazing feel is Square's choice to have you using 3 members of your party at all times, but allowing you to swap them out with any of the other 4 characters at any time. This gives you so much freedom for how you choose to take on battles. You will end up having favorite characters that are used most of the time, but some enemies will only be able to be hit by specific moves of certain other characters, forcing you to use all members of the party, which helps them stay somewhat balanced when leveling up. The characters that are used in combat gain AP, which is essentially just experience points to use on the spear grid in order to increase stats and learn new abilities. Although it's a little bit complicated at first, the sphere grid is a great way of making the leveling up system feel fresh. It also allows you freedom to build your characters exactly how you want to. For example, if you're using 3 specific characters for most battles, but none of them have the ability to poison an enemy with magic, any of those 3 characters will be able to learn Bio eventually if you're willing to build their sphere grid towards that. The game itself feels quite linear overall, but I actually don't think that's a bad thing. You're not able to fully free roam and revisit all areas until near the end of the game, but sometimes that can be the best thing a developer can do in order to really focus on the wonderful storytelling. Visually, Final Fantasy X holds up quite well assuming that you understand it's a 20-year-old game. Sure, some faces are way more detailed than others, and weird transitions from the in-game graphics to full CGI are a bit jarring, but overall, it's nothing that really takes away from the game itself, especially if you play one of the HD remastered versions that are available across all modern consoles. Some of the boss fights and summonings honestly look like they came out of a big budget game released today. So with all the good things I'm saying about Final Fantasy X's gameplay, visuals, and story, it seems like a no-brainer to play, right? Well, it's not that simple. Unfortunately, all those excellent things I mentioned are hindered by absolutely terrible decisions by the developers. Square Enix is not new to making stupid-ass decisions. In fact, I'd argue that they excel at both making great video games and horrible non-consumer friendly choices. I don't like using guides or walkthroughs unless absolutely necessary for a game, but this is a game where I'd highly recommend using one unless you like backtracking and grinding for over 5 hours at a time. I'm going to play a quick clip that will summarize the last 20 hours or so of my playthrough. If you've watched any of my previous videos, you'll know that I'm a big fan of difficult video games that are difficult but fair. Games that are hard for the sake of being hard drive me absolutely nuts, and Final Fantasy X is a prime example of this style of game. The absolute worst part of this game is the numerous boss fights that have roughly 10-minute unskippable cutscenes before them. After your 10th try and wasting so many hours on a boss, it doesn't matter how visually stunning the fight was or how excellent the cutscene before it was, you are so sick of seeing them that you find yourself wondering why you're even playing the game still. The even more mind-boggling decision was to not add the option to skip cutscenes on these HD remastered versions, as this would literally take almost no effort by Square Enix and it would make the consumer experience so much better. I understand the devs wanting the art of the game to shine, but why not have the cutscenes skippable after being watched for the first time? This is a prime example of why I love Square Enix games, but hate the company. And if you're watching this video and you didn't struggle beating any of the bosses in Final Fantasy X, your experience might be totally different than mine. The problem is a lot of it comes down to dumb luck on your first playthrough. Certain bosses require specific items or abilities in order to beat, and if you built your sphere grid in the opposite direction or didn't pick up the special item when you had the chance, you'll have to do tons of meaningless grinding in order to get the tools necessary to complete the job. This is why I recommend using a guide or a walkthrough, even if it's just to help you determine what stats to build up and win. With all that being said, though I was dumbfounded and infuriated by the last bit of the game, it is entirely preventable if you know what you're doing. On a second run through, I would probably have very few struggles and could actually enjoy all of those awesome fights and cutscenes. And the first 30 or so hours of the game might honestly be the best 30 hours of gaming I've ever had, because the storyline and the combat were both so excellent. So is Final Fantasy X worth playing if you've never played it before? Well, that's up to you. But to help you make your decision easier, like all of my retro reviews, I'm giving away an HD remaster of Final Fantasy X and the direct sequel X-2. All you have to do to be entered to win is like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Just be sure to mention that you'd like to be entered somewhere in your comment. Giveaway details are in the description. One last thing I want to mention is if you're a fan of the Final Fantasy franchise, be sure to turn on your bell notifications for the channel. I pre-ordered the Pixel remaster of Final Fantasy 1 through 6 and will likely be making some sort of tier list video giving my opinion on these games down the road. Thank you all so much for watching. Take care.